Hey friends, it's Carl here with another Calm Survival. And today we're talking about the stuff that's probably not going to end up in your first aid kit. So when we look at our core component, our scope, and our duration, there's some stuff that is probably just going to be too much, too big, too bulky. Now that isn't to say this isn't stuff you shouldn't have around, or you may not just have around depending on what's going on in the world, but is a little bit iffy to just having a kit that you're carrying all the time. Now on the one end we have something like a SAM splint, which they're really, really effective. They are very, very useful. These conforming splints are fantastic. They are a bit bulky, but I keep one around. It doesn't go in my hiking kit, but it goes in the box of stuff that goes with us when we go camping. So it's in with that stuff where because its biggest advantage is going to be somewhere where we're not going to get evacuated by ambulance, but it's going to provide a lot of comfort while we're driving out. I've known a few people that have, broken arms and broken wrists, and then had to do a, 4 or 5 hour four-wheel drive trip back to, civilization. That's unpleasant, all that bouncing and jostling. So something like that, kind of useful. On the other end of that spectrum might be something like an adjustable C-collar. Well, if that's within your training and your scope, maybe, but that's also probably not something the average person's going to carry, even in a workplace setting. You might have one, you might be trained to use it, but is it really going to be super necessary? You may be obliged to have one, but if you don't, you can go buy them, but that's getting a little excessive. Full-size CPR mask. Now, it's definitely going to work better than the little plasticky ones, but do you really need to carry it? If you don't have a bag to go with it, if you don't have an oxygen tank, you can start to see where it seems like a good idea, but without all the extra stuff, might just be a waste of space. Thermometer. Now, if you're dealing with an illness, hey, it's 2020. Having a thermometer is not the worst idea. But for a first aid kit, you know whether or not somebody has a fever. How bad of a fever is that actually super useful to you? Does it fall within your training to know how many degrees, whether or not that person's in trouble? Or are you going to look at them? Is their condition, good? Do they have a fever, but are they still responsive? Do they have a fever, but they're starting to act weird? That's probably more what you're going to go off of. But hey, they're good to have around the home, and the contactless ones got real cheap all of a sudden. So that's helpsful. I've got a stethoscope and a sphygmomanometer. My favorite silly big word, a blood pressure cuff. Now, yeah, it's a thing I happen to own. Most people are not going to have one in their house. If you have an elderly relative, you might have one of the automatic ones around. That's cool. It's a good thing to have. If I was going to tell somebody to buy stuff to set up their house, they're going to set up first aid, for whatever reason, this is going to be pretty low on the list. The reality is that unless you're going to be monitoring somebody for long term and you're going to have the skills to use it, the reality is, if your first aid course takes 2 weeks, this is useful to you. If your first aid course took 5 days, probably not. probably just go off of what the person looks like. And that's not to denigrate anybody's training. The reality is training takes time. My emergency first responder course was one of the 2 hardest weeks of training I've ever done, and it's still not that difficult. You know, the second level up from there is 6 months, and those guys actually have to know things. But even a remote first aid course that's only a couple of days long doesn't teach you how to really utilize this to the level that you know, to where it makes a lot of sense. Maybe a stethoscope, but definitely not a blood pressure cuff. Then we can add some other cool toys, like say a pulse oximeter. They're getting cheaper, but what's a good one? I don't know. I don't know if there's a fundamental difference between the $10 ones and the $100 ones. And anytime there's a marketplace where you have that vast of a price disparity between the good and the bad, and nobody can really tell you, I have not in my research found any good indication of what the value is, why the $150 one or the $100 one is better than the $10 one. I'll just eyeball it. That's how I'm going to view it. And then you have specialized stuff like blood glucose meters. Well, if that's a thing that you need to have around, you need to have that around. But to the average person, that's probably not super necessary. The upkeep, the maintenance, if you don't keep up on that, you've spent a lot of money on now a piece of equipment that might be untrustworthy. So the reality on that one is you're probably better off not having it and just doing the best you can. But as I say, if you have somebody in your house who is diabetic, or there's a chance that that might be the case, do that. Get the blood glucose meter, but make sure you're doing the work to make sure that it's running properly, because that is where things get dangerous. All of this stuff, there's training, there's things that will make using it better, easier, more efficient. So don't just go spending money until you've got the training to make it matter, okay? Because some of this stuff is just misleading otherwise. Some of it, though, like these SAM splints, yeah, I can improvise a splint. I can do that. Why improvise when you don't have to? So it's a few extra little bits that don't tend to get into first aid kits, but have been in a few of mine, depending on where I was and what I was doing. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.